BSCP logo for the Building State Capacity and Productivity Center, West-AD. The BSCP Center presents, in cooperation with the Education Commission of the States, Opportunities and Challenges in a New Policy Environment, a conversation with state chiefs.
Good morning. My name is Alan Morgan. I am with the Building State Capacity and Productivity Center at West-AD. The Building State Capacity Center is a federally funded, through the U.S. Department of Education initiative, that is designed to support, add strength to state education agencies. This morning we are in Iowa, in Des Moines, beautiful Des Moines, and with the beautiful Director of Education, Ryan Wise. Ryan is a veteran of education. He has served. Actually, I have a great appreciation for those of us that have come through the ranks from having been a deputy to being a chief state school officer. Brian was asked to become the Director of Education. Ryan made that decision to say yes not all that long ago, about within the last year. I think it was July of 2015. So he is a part of a new breed of chief state school officers we have in the country. And this morning we're going to talk a little bit about a number of issues that are current not only in Iowa but also across the country. Ryan, good morning and thanks for doing this.
Good morning, Alan. Thank you for coming to Iowa.
We're glad to be here. Let's talk a little bit about one of the landmark pieces of legislation at the federal level that all of us who've had a kind of history or involvement, or frankly, if we've been living or breathing in the United States, you've heard about No Child Left Behind, and we know about the importance since 1965 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Well, this iteration, many of us call Every Student Succeeds Act, is a time in our current status and also in our future that gives us some great opportunity and challenges for those of us that are engaged in some way with state educational policy leadership. We want to talk a little bit today about a state that has been a leader state in many regards in American education. Let's take Iowa and Ryan's plans as the new leader of this system, and let's talk a little bit about what you see as the biggest challenge coming out of ESSA, and hopefully the biggest opportunity. What will give you a chance to do some things you might not have been able to help your team accomplish had it not been for ESSA?
Sure. So, well, first, thank you for this opportunity to visit with you. This is an incredibly important topic for every state in the country and for every school and every student in every school. And we in Iowa are tremendously excited about the opportunities that ESSA presents to states and to our school system to really design an accountability and support system that benefits all students and ensures that truly every student does succeed, and that we now have ownership over both what success looks like and how we get there. You asked about challenges, and for me, the biggest challenge relates to just how seismic of a shift this is from No Child Left Behind to Every Student Succeeds. And anytime you make big shifts in behavior, in requirements, it naturally creates anxiety and some natural transition challenges. And so in Iowa, we're really trying to think about what will those challenges be and how do we work through those. So if you start just with the law itself, it's over 1,100 pages. Wow. There's a lot in there, and a lot still to come in terms of guidance from the U.S. Department of Education of exactly what do we need to do, what do we need to produce as a state. So as I think about challenges, I think about how do we shift from what was required under the old law to the opportunities given under the new law? How do we make sense of everything that's in there? And then how do we most effectively engage stakeholders in that process?
So take that set of challenges, which you've spoken to both in the context of the challenges coming forth, but to some degree the opportunities. Take the latter part. If you could pick 2 or 3 things that you think are fundamentally important to get done, fundamentally important for Iowa before November, the fall at least, September of 2017, what are those kind of key things that just have to get off of your to-do list?
So I think the biggest piece is really aligning as a state around our vision and theory of action. What is it that we want to do? And if we do those things well, what do we hope to achieve? Really having clarity on that vision and how we're going to get there. In schools, in our intermediary service agencies, our area education agencies, at the State Department of Education, and then among students, parents, and other stakeholders to really ensure that there's that deep alignment, that everyone knows where we're going and everyone knows they have a role to play in that. I think that's the biggest piece. And then really ensuring we have a coherent approach, that all of the different pieces of the Every Student Succeeds Act fits together. Whether you talk about the accountability and assessment system, preparing our teachers and leaders, serving English language learners and students of diverse backgrounds, that all of those things that we do make sense not only in the context of that individual part of the plan, but as a connected whole as well.
So the challenge I am guessing you have, but I have a lot of confidence in your capacity to address this challenge, but that we've heard about in other states as well in these kinds of conversations, has to do with communication. Trying to build stakeholder, I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but stakeholder ownership, involvement is, it's not easy. You've got a very talented strategic communication team here in this agency. You have, you and I have been involved in some activities with the Building State Capacity Center back last year as it relates to strategic communication. What do you see as what are your next steps to be able to take this grand a set of changes that need to be in place in schools fairly soon and get some ownership from this broad array of stakeholders through your strategic communication plan? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so I feel like we're at a really interesting point in time today when we're having this conversation in early June of 2016. I feel like we're walking into a house that's just about to be renovated. Okay. And we're walking through the rooms and we're saying, hey, I think we should do this with this room and this with another room, and we're going to bring other people in the house and think about how do we want to redesign this to make it fit and make it home. And I think things will naturally change as we get into that and bring more people in. And so I think getting folks in there early on to provide that input and to look at it together will be critical. Then as we advance through the process, well, we have a tremendous communications team here led by Stacy Hupp. One thing her and I talk about regularly is that communications isn't just the job of the communication team. It's all our job at the agency. And so it's really those people working in the programmatic units that are helping develop and design each component of the plan, ensuring that they have the support they need to communicate effectively with those constituents and stakeholders they're working with regularly. So it's really taking that, I think, that team approach and ensuring that others are empowered to communicate with those in the field, and that ultimately we're all aligned on what we're working toward.
So you are this kind of interesting mix of an experienced educator, notwithstanding your youth, and you've got this kind of vigor that goes with your new role and responsibility, but you have also a whole lot of colleagues out there across the country who are relatively new to this job of being a chief state school officer. So what's Ryan Wise's advice as they, not that you have all the answers, you have a process and you've talked a little bit about what you plan to do in Iowa, you mentioned the challenges and opportunities, but what advice do you have for other chiefs, whether or not they've got this wealth of experience, a June Atkinson who has a number of years of experience as a chief state school officer, or a Ryan Wise who was appointed in July of 2015. Take that kernel of counsel, if you will, that you would give to other chiefs. what do they need to be thinking about as well as they go forward with ESSA?
One of the benefits I feel that I have coming into this role and having been in it now for about a year is we've taken on some major strategic initiatives. We have a statewide teacher leadership and compensation system. We have a statewide early literacy initiative. We've done a statewide review of several sets of standards. And I know other chiefs have done similar things. And what I've found helpful when taking on those big, comprehensive, statewide initiatives is to really stay focused on what are you working toward? What's the vision? Because in any undertaking like this, there are hundreds of questions and decision points along the way. And I think it's tempting to answer all of those in isolation, just within the context of the choice or the question itself, and not within the context of the entire vision or the entire undertaking. And so, my advice would be to other chiefs, look back at things you've done that are parallel to ESSA implementation. What's worked well? How have you always drawn it back to the vision of success for your state? And transfer that work to what we're trying to do with ESSA implementation.
So let me attempt to paraphrase what I think you described as the imperative. The imperative is understand and be clear about your understanding of the vision for this set of substantial change, how it's going to ultimately improve teaching and learning, and be able to communicate and build support for that vision amongst the huge array of stakeholders that all believe they own the system, and they do. That said, is that kind of maybe in more words than I should have used, but is that pretty much what you're suggesting as the advice to other chiefs?
That is, and I think, finding the big question we're raising right now internally is what does that engagement look like, and how is that vision crafted, and how do you do that in the most effective way possible? Because you can't walk in with a blank sheet of paper, with 100 stakeholders and say, all right, let's group write this plan.
Right.
There has to be some structure and some guidance. At the same time, none of our stakeholders want to be a rubber stamp. They want meaningful engagement in the process. Mm-hmm. And so finding that balance is really at the heart of this work. And so for us, now sitting here in June of 2016, that's the big question we're wrestling with. What does that engagement look like, and how do we do it? And I know other chiefs are raising the similar issue right now and plotting, I think, a similar course forward.
So as you continue with this effort to provide its leadership, but it's leadership with a team, you have you're part of roughly a third or so of the chiefs in the country that have a particularly strong relationship with the governor. Now, that doesn't mean 2/3 don't have strong relationships, but given the way you come to this role as Director of Education in Iowa, the governor's office is substantially important to you, not only in helping the governor accomplish, in this case, but what he or she in other places have in mind with regard to their legacy on education. So take your advice, if you will, that you've been able to proffer for chiefs in general, and let's take it to those places where they have a similar governance structure to yours, and talk just for a second about how you establish, maintain, and ensure that you and Governor Branstad are on the same wavelength as you go forward.
Yeah, so Governor Branstad has been a tremendous leader for education in Iowa for decades. And as you mentioned, I am governor appointed. He appointed me to this role along with Lieutenant Governor Reynolds almost a year ago. And we are in regular contact. They have a senior education advisor, Linda Fandel, who has been in her role a number of years since Governor Branstad was reelected back in 2010. And so we have a very strong relationship with the governor's office, as you would expect in a governance structure where the director or commissioner is governor appointed. And so we will be sure to include the governor's office in these conversations as they go along, and they're a critical stakeholder in this effort, as governors are in every state, regardless of governance structure. And at the same time, we know we have lots of other stakeholders as well, as the governor's office would also acknowledge. And so while I am governor appointed, we know we have lots of people to engage in this work.
Yeah, very helpful. So we've talked a little bit about ESSA and the structure you've got and some plans and the importance of communication. What did I fail to ask you, Ryan? You have, you and I talked a little bit about this by telephone prior to this discussion this morning, and you were concerned that perhaps that with this year of experience behind you, that there may be so many things to be done on the horizon that this might not be a conversation to which you would have all the facts and details ready to go. Obviously, from our discussion, you're way down the road. You've got a lot going on, a lot to be done, but there may have been initiatives that you have in mind that you want to share with our audience that we didn't really talk about. So what question did I fail to ask you today, Ryan, that had I done better or more homework, I would have thought about asking you?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting to consider is how will ESSA transition impact states that had a waiver from No Child Left Behind versus how will it impact states like Iowa that were non-waiver states. And so we at this point feel fairly fortunate that we were one of the few non-waiver states, because we don't have to go back and rehash through lots of difficult transitions that happened in many states to get the waiver. So we feel like we're well positioned, being a non-waiver state, to kind of make a clean break from NCLB into life under ESSA. And I think it presents a tremendous opportunity for us in Iowa to build off of some of the things that we went forward with. And so to transition to your other question about initiatives, again, I'd bring it back to a few primary ones, like our comprehensive teacher leadership and compensation system. In Iowa, one thing that I think we got right was we put the idea of supporting teachers and building the profession in front of evaluation. And so now, over the last 4 years, we've created a comprehensive system of leadership and support that really allows more than a quarter of all teachers in Iowa to take on a formal compensated leadership role. And we believe by investing our best teachers in that leadership and improvement effort, we're going to see great results. And so that effort can help drive our transition into ESSA. And we can leverage now the federal law to make a unified, coherent system that builds on some of the things we've already been doing.
We've had the good fortune of visiting with State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister in Oklahoma recently.
Joy's great.
And she was just full of accolades about what Iowa has done in general, and your leadership in particular is related to this topic that you've just covered. What does it take? What are the central ingredients? Now, Oklahoma's moved ahead with implementing what Superintendent Hoffmeister calls the Iowa plan, if you will. What does it take for other states to potentially follow your lead, and maybe Oklahoma's, in that regard? How can they, what are the ingredients they have to have in place, Ryan, to make that happen?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons Iowa has been successful in a few areas, particularly our development of a comprehensive teacher leadership system, is because we've taken a consensus building approach that has had a clear vision of what we want to do, but has really brought in people to help shape it. Our TLC system, as we call it, was really the outgrowth of a 25-member task force that met for nearly a year to talk about, if we went down this road, what should the system look like? And so they were able to reach consensus on a number of key recommendations. The department wrote legislation that was largely aligned with the task force recommendations. It went through the legislative process, built stakeholder engagement along the way, and we ended up with our system. We've done that in a number of ways. We also just completed a comprehensive reform of career and technical education in Iowa, and are incredibly excited about the work in CTE and the connection to workforce issues to ensure that Iowans are prepared, both in their knowledge and skills, to take on the jobs of the future here in our state. And so again, that was the outgrowth of a lot of consensus building and the work of diverse constituencies coming together to really form and shape a plan that ultimately was easy for the legislature and for the governor to jump in and support. If you look at our legislation on TLC, you look at the legislation on CTE, both of those passed almost unanimously in both the House and the Senate, and had the governor's signature. So when you get that front end engagement and buy-in, it makes it easier when you get to the critical passage points.
Mm-hmm. And the real, I guess, mark of success is the degree to which practicing classroom teachers come back from this and say, this is not just another, great idea that's been, laid upon us from Des Moines. This is really an opportunity to improve practice and to improve teaching and learning. So, and it sounds like thus far, from what I gather as an outsider, that teachers in Iowa are in fact embracing this as well, because they've had some ownership in the creation of the system. Is that an overstatement?
It's not an overstatement at all. Teachers, I spent a lot of time in schools. I visited 56 school districts in my first year in this role. And every single week I was in schools and talking to teachers, talking to students, really getting a sense of things. Yesterday, in fact, I was at a professional development system with 10 different districts with teachers who are moving into these leadership roles. And just sitting at tables in small groups, asking them how they're feeling. And certainly there's anxiety for teachers, as they go from working with students throughout their career, and they were extremely successful. That's why they're getting this opportunity to take on these leadership roles. Now they're working with adults. And that can be a different ballgame in many ways. And so it's a big transition for those teachers. But I'll say in our first 2 years of now 115 districts that have been implementing the system, people are feeling tremendously positive about the opportunity it gives teachers to really take on a leadership role, to really have a voice in what a school does, how the culture operates day to day. And so it's exciting. I would certainly also add, it hasn't been painless. And if it were painless, I'd be worried. Because it would simply be more of the same.
That's right.
So I think, the fact that there are growing pains, but they're not to the extent that they're slowing down the growth, is encouraging.
That's great. Ryan Wise, Director of Education with the Iowa Department of Education. Alan Morgan with the Building State Capacity and Productivity Center at West.AD. We are very pleased, honored to have had you as a part of our discussion in this series, and we thank you for the work that you do now. And we're all looking forward to what will be the work that you're doing in the future. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Alan.
Very much.
The BSCP Center and Education Commission of the States would like to thank Director of Education Ryan Wise, Iowa Department of Education, and Dr. Alan Morgan. This podcast is in the public domain. While permission to reprint is not necessary, links to the podcast should be cited as BSCP Center Producer, 2015, June 15th, Opportunities and Challenges Brought On with Policy Leadership Shifts in SEAs, a conversation with SEA Chiefs, BSCP Center podcast. Retrieved from http://bscpcenter.org. This podcast can be viewed on www.bspccenter.org. The podcast is prepared by the BSCP Center under Award Number S283B120042 for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education of the U.S. Department of Education, and is administered by Advance Research Incorporated. The content of the podcast does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education or the U.S. Department of Education, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government.